We're going to be there in Nehemiah chapter 1 if you want to get your Bibles out and turn there with me. So good to be together again, worshiping God with you. I missed you last Sunday night as we made our trip up to North Alabama and eventually to Tennessee. Had a good time, enjoyed spending time with other preachers, and I appreciate you understanding my need for that. We've been talking about the eldership a little bit as the topic has kind of shifted to that a little bit. We've put forward two men, Ken and Keith, as potential elders for this congregation, and a couple weeks ago gave a whole lesson to talk about the qualities of a good elder and how we are supposed to be a congregation of sheep who are following their leadership and are trying to make their lives easier so that they can do us good and benefit us, and that's our goal. And so to help us kind of prepare for that and hopefully to set us on the right path as these men appear to be established as our elders perhaps in the future, I wanted us to start studying the book of Nehemiah. This is a great book. This is such an encouraging book for us to look at and to study together, to think about how God is working through leadership and how He's working through His people in order to accomplish certain mission, certain goal, which has been our focus really throughout this year, is to think about God's mission. What is God's mission for us? And ultimately, it boils down to the mission is the people who are all around us. They are our mission, that we are supposed to be helping them to understand the truth and to bring them to a greater point of understanding. We ourselves are supposed to have a better understanding. But all of that is also serving a primary mission and goal of glorifying God and bringing God's glory before all the nations, that all can see and understand that He is the one true living God. And the book of Nehemiah is about that exactly. So I'm looking forward to studying this with you. We're going to be kind of briefly working our way through this book over the next few weeks. So I hope you're as excited as I am. This is one of my favorite books in the Old Testament. Such an encouraging and powerful message found in this book. And as we open up, I want you to take a few moments and just kind of think about what happened whenever Pearl Harbor happened. What happened whenever 9/11 happened? These major catastrophes that happened in our nation's past. How did you feel? And what were your thoughts that were going through your mind as you went through 9/11, if you were old enough to have experienced that? And if you were old enough to know Pearl Harbor, you were probably pretty high now. But if you were old enough that you have family that experienced Pearl Harbor, you could just imagine. And you can see in history, you can see the response of the nation. How did they respond to these tragic, catastrophic events that took place in our nation? There was a lot of prayer. There was a lot of mourning. There was turning to God. And there was a lot of people who decided to enlist themselves in the armed services to try to help to fix the problem, to try to stop the evil and the wicked that was spreading throughout the world. Thankfully, we haven't had that happen in a while now. Hopefully it won't happen anytime soon. But I just want you to think about for a second that feeling of catastrophic news coming in and how it affects you and changes your life, changes maybe the whole course of your life. Maybe that's happened in other parts, in other areas of your life, that catastrophic news has come in that's just wrecked everything that you had planned in your life. And just kind of placed a tremendous burden on your shoulders, anxieties, fears, concerns, and a strong passion and a zeal and a desire to do something about it. That's what we're studying about to start off this book. A man who has news come in that is, in his mind, catastrophic. But it's interesting as we study this, that it's not an event like a Pearl Harbor or a 9/11. Instead, it's just a realization that the things that God has promised that His people are supposed to enjoy hasn't happened yet. So start off with me, Nehemiah chapter 1. It says, "The words of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah. Now it happened in the month of Kislev in the 20th year, as I was in Susa the citadel, that Hanani, one of my brothers, came with certain men from Judah, and I asked them concerning the Jews who escaped, who had survived the exile, and concerning Jerusalem. And they said to me, the remnant there in the province who had survived the exile is in great trouble and shame. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates destroyed by fire. As soon as I heard these words, I sat down and wept and mourned for days. And I continued fasting and praying before the God of heaven." Notice, let's pause there and just think about this. He has news come in from Jerusalem. His brother and others with him have come in. And he asked them, how are things going in Jerusalem? Nehemiah is living in Susa. This is the capital city of Persia. If you know your history, you know the Jews in Jerusalem was destroyed by the Babylonian Empire. Jerusalem was completely obliterated, and the temple and everything. And they were all taken into captivity to Babylon for 70 years until the Medo-Persians came in and they overcame the Babylonians, setting free the Jews, allowing them to return. Cyrus, the king of Persia, had the decree, and all the Jews were allowed to return back to their city, back to their homeland in Jerusalem. Well, a lot of time has passed now. And Nehemiah apparently did not go with those returning exiles. Instead, he stayed back, and he had a position of authority and power among the Persians, that he was a cupbearer, we read in just a little bit, to the king. He was able to rise up in the ranks and in the power. And he's sitting there in the royal palace day in and day out, providing the wine to the king. And he hears this news about Jerusalem. How's Jerusalem? How are the people there? How's the remnant doing? The remnant is a reference to Isaiah, what God had said there would be a remnant that would return. God fulfilled that promise. They returned. How are they doing? And the answer is they're in great trouble and shame. And the answer is the wall of Jerusalem is broken and its gates are destroyed. It is a mess, and it hasn't gotten any better. How would we respond to news like this? Like if this was you, like how would you respond to this? Oh, man, that's a shame. That is so sad. I sure am glad that I stayed in Susa, though. I sure am glad I'm not trying to live there. Ooh, that'd be tough. I mean, you have no walls, no gates. Everything's destroyed. I mean, what a mess. What a wreck. But Nehemiah is upset. It seems as though he is inconsolable. He sits down and he weeps and he mourns, it says, for days. It's not that's too bad. Oh, that's so sad. I hate to hear that. But it's an impact, an effect. It hits him and it hurts him. It hurts, it breaks his heart to know Jerusalem is still destroyed after all this time. And all of my people who have returned with such hope that Cyrus, who was foretold by Isaiah, has decreed for them to return home to receive the promises that Isaiah foretold, that they have experienced none of that. The whole city is still desolate and destroyed. And he's upset. Well, why? Why is he so upset? Because he loves God. And he loves God's people. And his love for God and his love for God's people is so genuine and so real that it exposes itself. It reveals itself. As this news comes in, he is literally broken. He cannot function. He is weeping and mourning for days over this. This is a big deal to him. This matters to him. He understands that that city being reconstructed and those walls being set up is a symbol for the people to know that God is with them. And for the nations to know that God is with them still. Even though He has allowed for them to be destroyed, He has brought them back from captivity and He has restored them on their land. And He wants God's name to be glorified in all the nations. That's His ultimate desire. And it burdens Him. It's a burden that's on His heart to know that His people are over there suffering and having no hope and living in this wreckage, that His God, His name is being probably defiled and blasphemed all over the earth because He wasn't able to build up the building. He wasn't able to build up the walls. It burdens Him. And He doesn't let it go. He holds on to that burden for days. What burdens our hearts today? What makes you upset like this? What wrecks you, causes you to weep and mourn? You see here from Nehemiah, our hearts should break along with God's heart. He's so entwined with God and understanding who God is and what God desires from His people. And He understands how it should be going so much. And He is looking forward to hearing good news about that. And it just shatters him to hear that it's not going well. He's so connected to God that what breaks God's heart is now breaking Nehemiah's heart. He has this zeal and this passion that I think is very important for us to recognize should be in us. The burdens that we have on our hearts are not as valuable as the burdens that God desires for us to have on our hearts. We might have all kinds of burdens. You know, we got bills to pay, we got mouths to feed, we got all kinds of things that we want that we can't afford anymore because inflation's up, and we got presidential garbage going on, and we want all these things for our kids in the future, and all these different kind of burdens that are on us. But the ultimate burden that should be on us is God's glory. And Nehemiah has a desire for God to be glorified and for God's people to be restored. And it brings him to his knees. That should bring us to our knees. So we see the church in disarray. So we see God's people suffering, failing to accomplish the mission of glorifying God. We see the walls broken, so to speak. It should break our hearts. It does his. And so what does he do? Well, he turns to the Lord. He turns his attention upward. He prays to God with a clear understanding of who God is and what God has done. And notice his prayer as it's this lengthy prayer that was read by Mark in just a few moments ago. In his prayer, he is calling and recognizing how great God is. It's not, God, you hadn't delivered. What are you doing? But it's, God, you are great and awesome. You keep covenants, and you have steadfast love with those who love you and keep your commandments. This is the way that he's talking to God. Let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer of your servant that I now pray before you day and night for the people of Israel, your servants. And then he changes in verse 6 to say, confessing the sins of the people. Notice he starts off with, you are great, you are awesome, you are amazing, you've always been faithful, you've always done everything you said you would do. And then he says, we have failed. And he confesses the sins of the people, which we have sinned against you. And then he says even this, he's not saying, all those people back then, they sinned against you and you destroyed their city and they deserved it. But we are blameless and you should rebuild our city. That's not the basis of the prayer. He says, we have sinned. And then he goes even more personal and he says, I have sinned. And my Father's house has sinned. We are guilty. You see how Nehemiah, as he recognizes that the city of Jerusalem has not been built, he correlates that with his own sin and his own failure. He correlates that with the failure of all of his people. And then he goes to himself. He's not just looking at everybody else and pointing fingers. He's saying, I myself have sinned. I myself have failed to do what I know I should be doing. And this is why the walls are broken and your name is not glorified. I have not stood up and done what you have given me the responsibility to do. I have lived selfishly. And yet, he doesn't see that sin that he's committed and think, so God, you're never going to help me, obviously. I'm not worth it. I'm not worthy of your help. I'm not worthy of you listening to my prayer. He doesn't look at God and think that way. Instead, he calls for God to do something amazing in spite of his failure, in spite of his sin. He calls for God to help him in this whole situation. And he's praying to God this prayer, asking for God to remember his words, verse 8, that you commanded your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the peoples. But if you return to me and keep my commandments and do them, though you're outcasts in the uttermost parts of heaven, from there I will gather them and bring them to the place that I have chosen to make my name dwell there. They are your servants and your people, whom you have redeemed by your great power and by your strong hand. O Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delight to fear your name. And give success to your servant today, and grant him mercy in the sight of this man. Now, we see the prayer takes a little bit more of a change, but he's recalling and remembering all that God has promised. He promised the punishment, but he also promised the restoration. And he's calling for God to restore, and he's calling for God to give them hope that it can be restored, it can be rebuilt. And then he calls for God to listen and to help him specifically. And in this last part, give success to your servant today, grant him mercy in the sight of this man. In this last part of this prayer, we get the sense that after the mourning and fasting has happened, after the days of prayer has happened, now he is to a point where he is approaching God's throne and asking for help for something very specific. Nehemiah has something specific in mind that he wants to do in order to turn things around. He's not content with the walls being broken. He's not content with the people being dismayed and discouraged. He wants something to happen different. He wants things to change. And he is the cupbearer to the king. He says, I'm in this perfect position. This opportunity has been given to me. How could I not make use of it? And so he prays for God to help him. You know, as we think about our spiritual burden here, like the idea that the church is struggling and that people who are part of the church are falling away, and the people who are a part of the church are just thinking there's no hope in evangelism, there's no hope in reaching out to the people who are lost. How do we deal with that burden? What is our method of dealing with it? Well, if you're like me, whenever you first became a Christian, well, let's just fix it. Just tell all these people what they're supposed to be doing. And get them to do the right thing and fix the problem. Just go fix the problem. Just do the thing. Just do it. Just do it. Just tell them. It fixes everything. And then that didn't work. And so I try something else. I got to do this. I got to do that. Well, I'm going to try this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I got to do something. Something has to happen. Something has to happen to change everything. So I'm going to do something. And it doesn't work. We fail. And eventually, we just put it to the back of our minds because it hurts too much to remember all those failures. Well, notice how different Nehemiah is in his way of handling this. Okay? He is praying, he is mourning for days, and then we read about him doing something. If you look at verse 1 of chapter 2, it says, in the month of Nisan. This news came in the month of Kislev. That's 4 months later that we read about him actually doing something. He has dwelt on this for 4 months. He has prayed about it, and he has not forgotten about it. And he's not yet acted to do anything to fix the problem. He has prayed about it, and he has lifted this all up to God, asking for God to help. And he's waiting patiently for God to provide him with the opportunity and with the wisdom and with the knowledge of what to do and how to do it. He sees, I'm in a position where I have opportunities. How can I use that to my advantage? And he doesn't rush into it, but he waits patiently and he thinks carefully. A lot of times, I think whenever we see a problem, we tend to try to do it all ourselves. I'm a very self-reliant kind of person. I think we are that way in our culture. And we think we can just approach the issues, the spiritual issues of the world around us with a do-it-yourself mentality. But it doesn't get fixed because we can't do it ourselves. We are fighting a spiritual battle with principalities and powers in the heavenly places. That's the way it's described to us. And so if the powers are greater than us, we need to accept the fact that we ourselves will not be able to overcome them. But God can. And so instead of thinking about what we can do and how we can solve all these problems, we need to do like Nehemiah does and turn our attention upward. Pray to God for months. I love how Ken and Keith had asked the congregation here as we move forward, as we think about being an elder. I said 2 weeks. I was like, 2 weeks enough time? We'll get this all figured out. No problem. They're like, no. We need time to pray. We need time to seek God's will. We need to make sure that it's clear that if this is going to succeed, it's not because we rush these two men into place, but because God is helping us. And that's the mentality that Nehemiah has toward what he's about to do. He doesn't rush into it. He thinks, God, if this is going to work, it's not going to be because of how great I am, but it's going to be because you help me. And I love that. That is powerful. In all of our efforts to try to change the world around us, we need to recognize it's not going to change because of our ability. But it's going to change if God helps us to change it. And if we're willing, like he is, to do what he's about to do. What we see him do in chapter 2 is amazing. It says, in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was before him, he took up the wine and he gave it to the king. Now I had not been sad in his presence. And the king said to me, why is your face sad, seeing that you're not sick? This is nothing but sadness of heart. Then I was very much afraid. I said to the king, let the king live forever. Why should not my face be sad when the city, the place of my father's graves, lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire? Then the king said to me, what are you requesting? So I prayed to the God of heaven. And I said to the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, that you send me to Judah, to the city of my father's graves, that I may rebuild it. And the king said to me, the queen sitting beside him, how long will you be gone, and when will you return? So it pleased the king to send me when I had given him a time. And I said to the king, if it pleases the king, let letters be given me to the governors of the province beyond the river, that they may let me pass through until I come to Judah. And let a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the fortress of the temple, and for the wall of the city, and for the house that I shall occupy. And the king granted me what I asked, for the good hand of my God was upon me. Notice here that Nehemiah approaches the king, and he lets his emotions be evident. Apparently, for the last 4 months, he has completely hidden his emotions about the situation. He has been mourning, he has been weeping in private, and then he puts on his good face, and he goes before the king, and he presents the king his wine. And he's been good at it. But now he lets it be known that he's sad. And the king is perceptive enough to understand that it's sadness of heart. And that, if you're a king, would be upsetting for the guy who is supposed to taste test your wine and make sure that it's not poisoned. What are you upset about, dude? Why are you upset here? We need, hold on. Let's figure this out before I drink anything. And the response of Nehemiah, he recognizes that this is dangerous. It says he's afraid. He's afraid, as we would be as well. And he says, let the king live forever. But then he explains exactly what's going on. You see how he doesn't shy away. He's not like terrified and like, nothing, I'm happy, everything's okay. He's not trying to fix the problem. He is ready for this. He has prepared himself for this event. He has rehearsed it probably thousands of times. If the king asks me, I've got to be ready. I know what I'm going to say. And he says it boldly. How could I not be upset, basically? And the way that he words it is something that almost puts guilt in the king's heart, that he would allow this to happen and to continue to happen. That my father's graves are ruined. And I need to rebuild them. I can't rebuild them. Nobody's rebuilding them. All this time has passed. Nothing has happened. It's so destroyed by the Babylonians that nothing has happened. And he says this boldly. All of this is very calculated. Notice also, though, in the midst of this, he turns to God and he prays again. Oh, you're going to say, what are you requesting? What do I need to ask him? Oh, God, please help me remember the things that I had prepared to ask him. And then he goes and he tells him all the things, and all the things are perfect. I mean, he tells him exactly what he would need in order to rebuild the walls. And he's very upfront about that. And he finds a positive response. And then what does he do? He goes further and he says, well, since, you've done this, maybe you could also give me a letter to help me get the wood and to help me get the materials. And maybe also you could give me enough to build my own house. What Nehemiah is asking for essentially is to be given a high position in the kingdom that a cupbearer would never be given. Never would a cupbearer be given that kind of rule and authority and power. And yet he's bold enough to ask for that. And what we see is he's seizing his opportunity. No other Jew in the nation is in that kind of position where he could have that kind of opportunity. And so he goes ahead. He goes through with it. And I love how after he goes through with it and he finds success, it says, the king granted me what I asked, for the good hand of God was upon me. He had prayed for God to answer him. He had prayed for God to help him. And it was such a bold thing, such a risky thing, that after it's done, he says, well, that was all you, God, because that would never have happened if it was just me. Kings don't do this. But this is our God. This is what he's able to do. We need to realize that we also can be bold. I think a lot of times our fear of the charismatic movement and the miraculous spiritual gifts and all of that kind of stuff, we're worried about all that, has kind of made us feel like God working in the world around us is some kind of witchcraft or sorcery. But this says he's always working. There's never a time in history that God was not working in some way. He had something in mind all along. And he works in the kingdoms of men. And we say he is providentially working. So we need to believe that he is able to providentially work in our lives. And we should, with boldness, attempt to glorify him and magnify him in the eyes of people around us. We need to do that with preparation like he does. We need to do that relying on God, trusting in God, hoping that God will see and act and respond. And we need to submit to the consequences. If you were to ask Nehemiah, well, what if the king decides to kill you before you can ever say the word? Would he say, well, I would rather die? Yeah, it reminds me of the three in the fire. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. Well, We don't know if God's going to deliver us, but we know He can. It's this kind of mentality that I'm willing to step out. I'm willing to be bold because I'm trusting that this is what God wants. I've prayed about it. I've spent time on it. I've meditated on it. I've prepared myself for this conversation. And I am relying on God to provide what I'm asking. But I'm taking this risk. And I'm good either way. If God says no and this doesn't work out, hey, that's okay. But I'm in an opportunity here, and I'm going to take a risk. That's faith. That's faith. We should take risks in our lives with faith. But they should be calculated risks. We should be thinking it through and making sure that it's really attempting to do God's will and to glorify God and to assist God's people. But that is exactly what we see Nehemiah doing, and he's setting an example for us. So what does that mean for you in your life? Like, in your life, you're not before a king. I don't think so. Maybe some of you have met presidents, and maybe some of you have had some influence over leaders, and some of you maybe are leaders in the community, or maybe leaders in your workplace or something like that. But each of us have our own little area of influence, and we have our own little opportunities to succeed in this, to bring about God's glory. And in order for that to happen, we have to stop sitting back and doing nothing. It's funny, I told you, I'm the kind that I see something wrong, I want to fix it. Others might see something wrong and they want to think about it, and they want to plan it, and they want to make sure it's perfect, and then they never do anything because one day they'll have the perfect opportunity and the perfect plan, and it'll be easy and there'll be no risk at all. You see, Nehemiah takes both and says, you're both wrong, okay, don't jump into it, but also at some point, you got to do something. And it's going to be risky. But God can work. And he believes it. And so he's given this opportunity to go to Jerusalem and to rebuild the walls. And to set us up for this study of Nehemiah, I want to see what happens next before we close. So verse 9 says, Then I came to the governors of the province beyond the river and gave them the king's letters. And these are the leaders over the region of Israel. Now the king had sent with me officers of the army and horsemen. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite servant heard this, it displeased them greatly that someone had come to seek the welfare of the people of Israel. Notice he had tremendous success in speaking to the king. And he had these letters of authority that told him what he was going to be doing and gave him that opportunity. But now he's there, and all of a sudden it becomes very real to him. I'm doing this. Can you imagine? You're the cupbearer, and now you're over all of this material, and this huge project is placed at your feet. I mean, you see how taking that risk resulted in a heavier workload and a heavier burden for him. Even though the burden of Jerusalem being being destroyed and all that was heavy on him, now he's got a new burden that's placed on him to actually accomplish the work. And what he sees is this is not going to be easy. There are going to be people that are going to cause problems whenever we do this. And so maybe you've got something that you've got in mind, like, oh yeah, this is great. I'm going to go do this, and God's going to be with me, and he's going to help me. And maybe you find success in that. But even in doing it, you're going to find some who resist, some who oppose you and want to rebel against you and keep you from doing the thing that's going to bring God's name glory. And notice how Nehemiah reacts to this. Verse 11, so I went to Jerusalem. He didn't react. He didn't even oppose them. He didn't go up against them. He didn't rebuke them. He just focused on doing the work. I think there's a lesson in here for us as well. The idea that this is encouraging and motivating us to start a difficult journey and to do things that are difficult. But knowing that the future is going to be difficult, knowing that it's not going to be easy, we want to do it because we love God and we love God's people so much. This is why anybody becomes an elder. This is why anybody pursues the path to becoming an elder. Because they love God and they love God's people so much. And they're burdened over the struggling of the sheep that they desire to help them. And that's what we see going on in the life of Nehemiah. And we also should see that in ourselves, that there should be this desire for us to help God's people that urges us into a very difficult situation. Knowing there's going to be resistance, we can't be afraid. We can't have doubt. We can't pull back. We have to push in through the fear. You notice in Nehemiah, as he's interacting with the king, it says he was very afraid, and so he prayed to God, and he spoke anyway. That's what we got to do. I understand we're afraid, but we got to do it anyway. We have to do what is ultimately going to glorify God. And in every situation, it's going to be different. There's going to be occasions where we need to oppose those who are opposing us. We need to set them straight. And there's going to be other situations where we're just like, oh, okay, sorry you hate this idea. Sorry you're mad about this, but I got the letters and I'm going to do the work now. So that's kind of how Nehemiah handles it, because he recognizes, I got walls to build. I can't spend all my time fixing all these problems and these issues that you got. You're not my problem. I'm going to focus on the walls. I'm going to focus on God's people. And I think that's a wonderful picture for us. As we move forward in Nehemiah, that is what he does, essentially, throughout. He doesn't let Satan distract him. He doesn't let people distract him. He just focuses on building the walls. Okay? So tremendous lessons for us to learn in our lives. Is if you feel like God has placed a burden in your heart, that there is something that your eyes have been open to that is a big deal to you, that you feel like is going to give God glory. What is it? I want you to come to terms with that, whatever it is, and understand God might have gifted you to bring about a change in that, or God might be willing to gift you if you devote yourself to the spiritual growth to where you can accomplish whatever it is that you feel like needs to be accomplished. And I want you to learn as we look through this that love for God and love for God's people should cause that to be a burden on us. We should feel burdened by the things that are missing, the things that are broken in this world. And that should motivate us. We should pray. And like Nehemiah, we should examine our hearts and confess where we're wrong and where we've made mistakes, where we've fallen short and we've not done what we should. And that's led to a lot of this brokenness. And we need to be making ourselves ready for that opportunity. I'm not saying today, tomorrow, go out and fix the problem. Remember, he devoted himself to prayer and fasting for 4 months before he made a move. So whatever it is, understand, this is a marathon. And if you're going to bring about real lasting change, then you need God's help in this. So pray for God to help you. And whenever that opportunity comes, embrace the fear. Speak boldly. Maintaining humility. But remember, it's about God and His glory. That's all that matters. And persevere through whatever challenges you face. Constantly realizing that God is with you. You can rely on Him. You can count on Him to help you. He promises to be with His people. I hope that this has helped you and encouraged you in your walk with God. I hope that you're excited about the changes that are going on in our congregation and the future that we have and the potential that we have here. And I hope that you're willing to devote yourself to this, to be a part of this, and to lift up the body of Christ so that it can glorify God on the earth. That's what we're here for. That's our mission. And if you're not a part of that, we want you to be. God provides grace, infinite grace, for all of our sins and all of our shortcomings, not so that we can continue to live hopeless and miserable lives, but so that we can be transformed and so that we can become a working part of His kingdom and we can bring glory to God and we can bring others into that kingdom. We have so many wonderful spiritual blessings in Christ. And if you're not yet a part of the church, you've not yet received all those spiritual blessings, we want to help you. Let us know how we can help you. Please come as we stand and as we sing.